Thank you. You guys should hold the clapping till the end. You're not sure what you're getting into yet. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank Startup Grind, and I also want to thank the Innovation Center, and want to thank all of you coming out on a school night, as we like to say in the States. So this is special for me because I am really proud to be Jewish, and I do a lot of freelance speaking with the operative word free. I love to learn and I love to teach, and I think so much of that is part of Judaism. So it's really it's an honor to be here, and entrepreneurship is very special to me as well. So let me jump right into it. And I'm a wanderer. I'm what you call a wandering Jew, as they say. And I want to start with my favorite son. I only have one son, but I have two daughters. And my son played for the development Israeli national team a year and a half ago. And actually, I just saw Josh walk in somewhere back there. Josh played on the Israeli national team. And in 4 years, hopefully my son will play on the Israeli national team when the games are up in Vancouver. But I don't know how many of you knew, last summer, 47 countries from around the world came to Netanya. And lacrosse is a relatively new sport in Israel, and the Israelis, which Josh was part of, finished 7th in the world. Is that right? So very proud. That deserves a hand. But when I saw my son wearing that jersey, that really that was very special to me. All right, little agenda here. Give you quickly my background. I'm going to talk about some lessons learned. I have been an entrepreneur for a long time. Let me ask, who in here works for themselves? Raise your hand. Wow. Okay, who else in here would like to work for themselves? The rest of the hands go up. Okay. So I've learned a lot through success, but I've probably learned more through difficulty, and I'm happy to share. No questions are off limits tonight. You can ask anything professionally, personally, about the family. Happy to share. I also will talk about some of my favorite books, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are really important to me. So I always like to set goals, and I'm a big fan of list of threes. If I have 9 ideas, I divide by 3. If I have 1, I multiply it. But people seem to remember list of threes. I like to teach. I love to learn, and I like to have fun. Fortunately, we're not heart surgeons for little kids, so we don't have to take ourselves too seriously out here. So in the next hour plus, let's try to tell some stories and anecdotes and maxims. That's another way people like to learn, is storytelling. And I do a lot with marketing and sales. And I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But marketing, you have to tell a story before you sell a story. And again, I'm going to give you anecdotes, maxims, aphorisms, because that's how I remember things, and that's how I share with my team and people that I work with as well. Okay, I'm going to jump in to my background. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and I played soccer there, actually, and I brought up a remnant for the dorm rooms, and kids said, "Where'd you get the carpet from?" So I went back, and I brought remnants. I gave them to my teammates. But the next year, I'm like, I think I can sell these because so many people asked. And I took a truck and I put 112 rugs in there. I could only afford like 50, but the owner of the carpet store allowed me on consignment. He knew my dad, and he said, "Look, whatever you don't sell, you can bring back." And I sold out. And when I was a senior in high school, I was doing this on 28 colleges around the country. So really, over the last 30 plus years, I've started multiple for-profit companies, and I'll talk about a few. I've started a couple not-for-profit companies, which I'm really proud of. These are companies that, for example, one of them is called Shalom Learning. It's an online Hebrew school. In the United States, we teach Hebrew school if you don't go to a Jewish school, a yeshiva or a day school. And it's not a very good model. So I said, there's got to be a better way. And now we have over 7,000 students around the country that are learning Hebrew school from 2nd to 7th grade online. And we did 3 things. We created a digital platform. We brought in world-class educators to make the teaching more, the actual curriculum more interesting. And the most important that I missed, teachers. We taught teachers how to be great at teaching online. When you think about your classes over the years, probably your most favorite class, you can remember the teacher. The teacher is more important than the subject. And I can remember my best teachers, and they were more influential than my favorite classes, or at least subjects. So I've started a lot of for-profit companies, a couple not-for-profit companies, and then I talk about no-profit companies that I've started. That's euphemism. They didn't work out so well. I lost money, but I learned a lot. When somebody says, well, it was a great learning experience, that means things didn't go so well, although I learned a lot. All right. Again, this was me in college. I talked to you a little bit about, starting with the rugs and then selling my senior year. All right, I started talking about the 3 types of companies, and I'm going to give you an example of all 3, because I think it's really important. There's only one difference between a for-profit company and a not-for-profit company. Does anybody know what that one difference is? This is the interactive part of the speaking.
Shareholders?
Maybe. Maybe is a nice way of saying no.
The non-profits cannot give out dividends. They have to reinvest that in the company.
Right. So what we say in the United States, the one difference is tax status. That's right, because a for-profit, the money can go out and you're taxed on it. A not-for-profit, the money stays in and you're not taxed on it. But a lot of people don't recognize that not-for-profits should be run like for-profits, because we use the term, and I don't know if it translates in Hebrew, ROI, return on investment. That's in the for-profit space. In the not-for-profit space, we call it ROI, return on impact. And the more money you make in a not-for-profit, the better you can make a difference in what you're doing as well. So one of my companies, I created a student loan business. And when I started this business, the objective was to create as many online student loans. And I'm just going to tell you quickly, just to give you an idea of some of the scale and the advantage of the internet. I was a direct marketer. I started with trucks and carpet, then I got into direct mail, and then I got into the power of the internet. And even though I was in the internet 13 years ago with this business, I'm going to tell you 2, not 3, I'm breaking my own rule, why the internet is the most powerful platform and why we're still in the early stages. We made a lot of money quickly, and I want to tell you how. In 3 years, this is 12 years ago, we went from 0 to almost $3 billion in student loan face value. They were $25,000 in loans, but we sold 120,000 loans in 1 year. And we did that in our 3rd year. We generated $120 million, and the company made $40 million that we distributed to shareholders. And here's how we did it. We had a fantastic value proposition. You know, business is really hard on one hand. I have such deference and humility, especially as a startup over here. Crossing the chasm to an ongoing concern is a bitch. It's really hard, and you guys know it. I mean, it is really hard. I have such deference and respect for how hard it is to make a shekel, but I have resolve because we have access to intellectual capital, financial capital. So we have advantages that most people in this world don't. And when I'm doing a startup, I like to start in the middle. I like to make sure I have deference, but I have resolve. Somebody in here can quote my Judaism, although I'm very passionate and I have a strong spiritual. I'm not as learned as I'd like to be, although I'm working on it. You're going to know, a lot of you, there's a rabbi that talks about in the left pocket, you have dust. And in the right pocket, you have, like a saying, you're the greatest. And I think that's kind of what I do. I try to stay in the middle and recognize you've got to respect how hard it is to make money, but you've got to have resolve, not bravado or arrogance, but you've couple attributes about an entrepreneur. One is optimism. You really need to be at some level an optimist because it's so hard to go from nothing to create something. And then obviously you've got to be able to deal with risk at some level. Does anybody know where the word entrepreneur came from? What's the origin of it? It's not Hebrew, by the way. French, bien sûr, well done. Nicely done. How's it translate? Does anybody know where the definition, what it technically means? Prendre is to take a risk. A lot of people know entrepreneurs are risk takers, but a lot of people don't know it also has another definition, and that's planner. So when your friends tell you you're a crazy entrepreneur, you can say, that may be so, I'm optimistic, but I also have a plan. And I have a plan B as well. It's a misnomer. A lot of people think entrepreneurs are mavericks and crazy. They're optimists, but they have a plan B as well. That's really important. So talking at a high level, this was a success. And there were two things that are still relevant today. On the marketing side, or above the line, we were able to leverage the email marketing. We sent out $5 million a month. This is 12 years ago. We spent $60 million in email marketing, but it's a lot less expensive than direct mail or offline marketing. So we got to millions and millions of people in marketing very cost effectively. Then on the cost side, we were the first one to do electronic signatures. Instead of having a contract for student loans where we had to FedEx 50 pages and they would send it back, we were able to be the first ones where they could just use their signature on the computer. So not only did that take down a lot of costs, we had 30, 40,000 more people, about a third that became our customers. So marketing and sales and operations, you can make a lot of money. Shalom Learning is my passion, that's my legacy, wanting to make a difference. Again, a lot of American Jews hate Hebrew school because it's boring and that they have to take it after school and they have to drive to the synagogue. We created a digital way for them to learn, and now there are over 7,000 students around the country, which we're really proud about. And I will tell you that I was proud to be Jewish, but Hebrew school turned me off to really learn about Judaism. And it was, I say every Jew has a flicker in them, and if we're lucky and they're lucky, something ignites it. And for me, 10 years ago, it was learning about Shalom Learning and studying, and it's the greatest book club in the world. really to learn and study about Judaism. It's just a spectacular story. So this is my, there's a term for-profit, and then they call it not-for-profit. I like to call for-profit and for-purpose. My not-for-profits are for-purpose. And then the last one, this didn't work. This was one of my best ideas where, again, I've done a lot in education, and on college campuses, the health center closes on the weekend and it closes at 5 o'clock. So actually, it was an Israeli brothers that raised a couple $100 million that had this telemedicine. They had thousands of doctors and they had the platform. We were the marketing and sales arm in the college market. It didn't work. And normally businesses don't work for two reasons. The biggest is execution, and execution can mean so many things. But there's also, when there's not a market for something, I don't care how well you execute. Because we knew this business so well, because we used the same model as my first company in college, we were too early. Going direct to consumers, even today with telemedicine, it's such a great value proposition, but the consumer's not ready. So this was a big win. We made a lot of people a lot of money. This I'm really proud of, and the ROI, return on impact. This I learned a lot where I call it dumb tax and scar tissue. So I want to share some of my dumb tax and scar tissue going forward. One of the things I highly recommend, model the masters. There are people that really know what they're doing, learn from them. I would much rather be a fast follower than a pioneer. So many people want to be a pioneer, but pioneers get arrows in their back. I'd rather learn from somebody who's made mistakes and be successful. It's a big world out there. There are very few Googles and Amazons that control the world. There are many, many second and 100th place companies in a vertical that make a lot of money and do well. So 3 types of businesses here. All right, now I want to take 6 minutes. I can tell you about the 5 keys to growing a startup, but Bill Gross, and again, model the masters, in 6 minutes, he's going to do it more effectively if we can put the video on. So Bill Gross, this is a TED Talk, it's only 6 minutes, and it's so apropos for startups. I've set this out hundreds of times to startups. Okay, go for it, Bill. All right, who stole my clicker? I have been known to lose things. What'd you think of that 6-minute video by Bill Gross? Any comments? Agree, disagree? Yes, in the back.
How do you plan good timing?
Did you still have my clicker? Did you say, how do you plan good timing?
Yeah.
By the way, if I could answer that question, I'd be on my private island right now. And I would be still teaching, but I would be Skyping in or a hologram doing that. Look, that is the multi-billion dollar question. You know, in investing, they say you can't time a market. In business, there's something called a headwind. Like being in the newspaper business today, that's a headwind. Being in digital, that's a tailwind. It's a lot easier to sail or to move when you have the market behind you. So, thank you. Thanks. Timing is really hard to predict, but there are some things you can do in terms of market research and being thoughtful what may work and may not. I would not suggest getting into publishing today. There is something to be said about being a contrarian. You know, Warren Buffett says, when people are greedy, be fearful. When people are fearful, be greedy. So it's I wish I knew the answer to that question outside of research, listening, and not falling in love with your baby. I'm a pretty good direct marketer for a couple reasons. I almost went out of business 4 times, twice being wildly unsuccessful where I had more inventory than sales. And then twice being wildly successful where I had more sales than inventory. And I survived both companies. And my takeaway from that is what location is to real estate, testing is to a direct marketer. By testing, and you guys all know about MVP, but you mitigate your downside if you're wrong, and you mitigate your upside if you're right. So it's really important to test. And it doesn't matter what we think, it's what the market thinks. And you want to subjugate your ego and not fall in love with your idea. That's really, really important. Okay, so to summarize, in order, and he did a lot of research in a esoteric study, but using empirical data, Bill Gross, with hundreds of companies evaluating, and I agree with all of these. Timing is the most important. Team is the second most important, but this is the one you can control. Third is the idea. Fourth is the model. And the reason why cash is last, because if you have these 4, cash will follow. Yes?
Regarding the team, what was his measure of a good team, or what is your take on what is a good team? Is it something that is diversified? Is it someone with past successes?
Yeah,
soft skills?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reason why I say it's a great question, because this is the most important area for me. In my classic list of 3s, when I hire, and nobody works for me. I've never been an employee. I've been an employer my whole life. I've always felt everyone works with me. And I think it's critical when you are building a team, these are the 3 things that I look for. First is culture, first is core values. And people say honesty and integrity, that's like breathing. I mean, don't even write that as a core value, because that's a given. If it's not, you got a lot of other problems outside of jumping the chasm from startup to ongoing concern. My core values, do whatever it takes. Radical candor and experience your complementary skill sets can be. I'm a marketer in sales and I focus on strategy. I've always had an operator to make sure my trains run on time and they are able to fulfill what I sell. I talk about the difference between a marketer and a promoter. A marketer backs up what they sell. So complementary skill sets are so important to have. And the third one, which most people miss, alignment. You want to make sure you're all rowing the same way and you're in the same boat. And I'll give you some examples. If you have a partner that has a lot of money and doesn't want to work hard, and you're just graduating from college and you're starting out and you're working 100 hours a week, you guys are not going to be fully aligned. If the expectation is you're even partners and you're going to do whatever it takes. I'm bastardizing this example, but alignment's important and managing expectation is important, really important. It's important internally and it's important externally as well. So one of the things I talk about is nowadays, and I tell this to parents who have children preparing for college or even high school, and I tell executive teams that I work with, God bless you, he has, because we're here. I tell people, double down on your strengths, manage your weaknesses. I'm going to say that again. Double down on your strengths, manage your weaknesses. So if somebody's good at sales, we want them to be great at sales. And they don't have to worry about operations because we've become a world of specialization. and the ability to compete, you really have to be great in areas. And if I'm sorry that I didn't ask for a whiteboard, but one of the things I like to show is you not only want to figure out what you're great at as a company now, but you also have to know what you're not great at. I'll give you an example. Nordstrom's, which I don't think's in Israel, maybe it is, they are known for great customer service, but they're not the cheapest company out there. Walmart, the cheapest company, but their customer service is not that great. It doesn't need to be, because people want the least expensive, and Nordstrom, they can charge a lot because people want customer service. Pick what you're great at and manage what you're not great at. Okay, next slide. These, when I invest in companies, and even when I start companies, over the last 30 years, as I've said, I've started, I think, 9 for-profit companies. 5 of them actually made money. And a lot of it was luck, good timing. A lot of it was hard work, and a lot of it was modeling the masters, wanting to be a fast follower, to learn from smart people. 2 of them, I lost a lot of money, and 2 of them, I kind of broke even. These, and I've invested in a little over 40 startups, early stage companies, pre-revenue. About a third of them have made money, a third of them I lost money, and a third of them remain to be seen. But it's actually a high success rate for startups. And one of the reasons why I'm pretty good at startups, I value the team first. I invest in areas that I know about, and I like to invest when I have a competitive advantage. When I make a risk-adjusted investment, sometimes there's not great upside, but I'm not going to lose my money, which is unusual in a startup. Other times, I'm going to lose it all, or we're going to make money. But you've got to understand the team, and you've got to understand the parameters of what you're investing in. So these are the attributes that I like. This is Devin Shane. Each one of you, when you start something or you invest in something, you're going to have different ones. First, I love annuities. I love recurring revenue. Business is hard enough. To have to start over every year is a bitch. If you can find a business like insurance, where just every year, hopefully you keep a client and maybe you can get more out of the client by offering more. I love annuities. It's just recurring revenue. It's beautiful. I love scale. I talked about the student loan business. I got to 120,000 people that spent $25,000 with us because they all had the same need, and there were millions of them. Scale is a beautiful thing. I don't like to tailor something. There are probably creative people in here. They want everything to be different. God bless them. If that's what you want, but understand what you want, what your competitive advantage is. Third, high gross margins. I like businesses that allow me to make mistakes and we still make money. And making money, we do good things with it. We try to do good and do well. If you're in the produce business, you buy an apple for 5 cents and you get to sell it for 6.5 cents. That is really difficult when you have gross margins, the difference between cost of goods and what you sell it for. Because by the time you take overhead and everything else, if you're lucky, you're working on 3%. Versus when we were in the student loan business, we were able to make, after all of our expenses, 40% because we had such a high gross margin. I do not like inventory. My first business, we sold carpet, care packages. I just don't like moving physical stuff. Student loans, I was able to move information. That's my preference. You have more leverage if you can get out of inventory. There are a lot of logistics people, some in this building tonight. That's their competitive advantage. One of the board members of Amazon, and I don't know if you know the company Chegg, they do textbook rentals. I actually looked at that business for Kleiner Perkins, they wanted me to evaluate it before they put their money into it, $25 million. I said, it's a great model. Instead of selling a textbook at $150, instead of buying a used one at $100, you could rent for $25. They asked me, I just sold my third business. They said, would you put your hat in the ring to be CEO? I said, I am honored, but no. And they said, why not? I said, I hate inventory. They said, we love inventory. Amazon's done pretty well with loving inventory. And then I talk about high revenue per employee. That's somewhat self-explanatory. You know, when I had a business doing 120 million in revenue and we had 300 employees, that's $400,000 per employee. Versus when I had the business that lost money, I think I had 10 employees and we did, carry the one, we did about $100,000. That's $10,000 per employee that I was paying $100,000. You can't make that up in volume, as they say. And then this is part of the MVP loop. Actually, does anybody know who the author of The Lean Startup is? Do you remember his name?
Eric Ries.
Nicely done. Eric Ries and I worked on the Chegg evaluation together. He did the technology in the back end. I did the marketing and the front end to see, and we both believe in MVP. I talked about the importance of testing on the marketing and sales side. He talks about, obviously, this was in 2007, 12 years ago. How am I doing on time? All right, I'm gonna keep going. Now I'm gonna run through some of the lessons learned because I wanna get to questions as well. These are just anecdotes, maxims that are important to me. Again, I love storytelling. I love it with my team, and I even like it with my prospects and clients. People like to learn through stories. People, starts with people. Great, great line, and I don't talk much about culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is a really hard word to give a definition, but you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it. When you walk into a company, if there's nothing going on, you get a sense of their culture. If there's a lot of excitement going on and you see people with smiles on their face, you know a little bit about the type of culture that they have. You know, one of my favorite mentors, and I use the term mentor a lot, I spent a day with Jim Collins 20 years ago with 10 CEOs. It's one of the most magical days of my life. It was before Good to Great came out. And, you know, he talks a lot about getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus. And this is an important one where I didn't appreciate, and the right people in the right seats. One of my benevolent billionaire mentors, and one of the takeaways, if you can get a benevolent billionaire as a mentor, I encourage you to. He asked me if I would help him monetize this business. And I said, sure, because he invested in me over the years. And it was, he had a passion for why does it take so long to toast bread? And why does pizza coming out of a microwave taste so lousy? And he spent tens of millions of dollars in 10 years, and he asked me if I'd help him commercialize it. Well, the problem is I'm not a technologist, I'm not an engineer, and it got stuck in the manufacturing phase. We couldn't get out of that stage, and I was able to get a 1 million unit purchase, but the efficacy of the technology was not there. So it was the first time in my career that I was in the wrong seat, and it was the first time that it wasn't an idea. He put me in, or I was CEO, but not full-time. I was executive chairman, but it was very difficult, and first time I was not in my best area. Yes?
Did he coin the Peter principle?
Did Drucker or did Bruce?
No,
Oh,
Peter.
just Peter's very good. I don't think he did, but I like that. I may use that. I do know the Peter principle.
It's very important.
It's good levity. I like it. All right, decision making. This is one of the best pieces of advice I ever received. Colin Powell, who was a 4-star general and Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, he talked about decision making. He called it the 40-70 rule. And I'm like, this is our general, he doesn't know how to count, 40, 70, that doesn't add up to 100. And he talked about in decision making, if you have less information than 40%, it's probably too early. If you have more information than 70%, it's probably too late. In that 40 to 70 range, you gotta make a good gut decision. So my team knows they come and see me around 65% when they need us to make a really good, important decision. So we call it the 40-70 rule. The other one from Jim Collins, you know, I used to say my first company, we would either sell or we would be account management. And I would say they're not mutually exclusive. The great ones in business and in life can do both. It's an and, not an or. The ability to hold one idea and work on something else. Do we invest short term or in the future? How many times have you heard that? It's an and. Do we work on sales or do we work on building the product? It's an and. The great ones understand you can do both. So my wife a few years ago said, which pair of shoes do you like? And I said, I like the ones to the right. She goes, I'm getting them both. You taught me about and, not a or. I'm like, okay, I'll buy that.
How does that work with focus? One of the most important things of the
It is.
startup is to stay focused.
So I'll add a line to focus was asked up here. You build wealth by being concentrated. You keep it by being diversified. That's focus. The and, you can still be focused with doing two things that are complementary, or they're vertically integrated, or they are critical to the business. Another rule of thumb, and again, you're gonna hear me say a lot of things that you've read or heard before, but they're best practices. I'm not that smart where I can create better ways of doing things. So I like to model the masters in areas. It's still hard to execute, even if you know the answer. So there's the importance of focus, and when you're in a startup, it's so hard because you're trying everything to get some traction. And you also are told you have limited resources, you've got to focus. But that's where you've got to test. And is you're working on the business, raising money, and you're working in the business where you're trying to make something work. And there's a great expression, when you can say no more than you say yes, you've arrived as an organization. All right.
Devin, let's move on to the one-on-one chat.
You got it. Let me just get to the last one. I will send you this presentation, okay? That's my family, the most important thing in life, but here's the last point. Nope, not him. All right. If you get one point, one lesson as a takeaway today, I want it to be this one. I don't know if it's going to translate as well in Israel as it does in the United States, but I'm going to ask, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Philip.
Philip, will you stand up and look under your chair, please? Yeah, you gotta, I know it's not Sherry, you gotta look under there. What do you see?
Wires.
Okay, not just wires. Both of you can look. This part I thought would be easy. Is it not there?
Not that I'm saying anything.
Wires, that's funny. He's right, wires. Maybe it's this chair.
This one?
Look, all right, I can't believe that's a first. So I taped a dollar bill under there. And the lesson is, somebody stole it already. Well done. I was going to put a shekel, but you don't have a bill. And we call it, I bet you it's under there somewhere. Normally we have chairs where it's easy. Do you see it? All right, great. All right, stand up, Phil. He found it. Will you stand up and show the audience what you have? Do you know what this dollar bill represents? And we call it a buck in the United States.
God we trust.
In God we trust, right? That's true. What that dollar bill represents as it relates to entrepreneurship, you got to get off your ass to make a buck in this world. Good luck. That's yours. Okay.
it will be followed by questions from the audience. So if you have any further questions, there will be enough time. So let's start. So Darren, you've spoken a lot about, with the professional side of the startup and everything, but I want to start with the personal aspects. Can you give us a little bit of background? Because it's always interesting to see who's the person behind the persona, behind all these long stories. So if you can give us a little bit of background. We know that you're Jewish by origin, but where you live, what's your history
Sure.
and everything.
Yeah, I can do that quickly, hopefully efficiently. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father was a poor boy from Baltimore, and my mother came from not affluent, but upper middle class, and she valued education. My father valued hard work, and my mother had breast cancer at a young age, 27, and she went on to become one of the leading experts in the world on the psychological aspects of breast cancer and reconstruction. My parents got divorced at 18, but I say I don't hold either one. I'm not prejudiced against either one of them. I said I hate them both equally for getting divorced. But I would say I have unconditional love from both my parents, and they got along well together, even in divorce. But I had unconditional love growing up. I have an older sister who I'm close with. I've just been an entrepreneur from day one. I enjoy transactions. I don't care what the product or service is. I like to make people better off. And there's something called market. I like to be a little above market because I play long ball. And people want to do deals with me because I'm transparent and I want to do what's best for them. And one of my raison d'etres is Pareto optimal, where all sides are made better off. Instead of 50-50, instead of 48-52, we're going to be 53 and 53. That's a little bit of blue ocean, creating more value. So well loved as a kid, and really feel fortunate. Everybody in here won the lottery, the human lottery. Again, I don't know any of you well, but being born by the parents that you were in this country or the United States or other, at this time period, we're incredibly blessed.
Thank you. Now it seems like you've been a serial entrepreneur. You've sold, you bought. I wanted you to elaborate a little bit about the personal sacrifice, the personal prices that such a great entrepreneur is the cost, but it's.
So I will share with you. I have a disease that a lot of entrepreneurs have, and a lot of Jewish entrepreneurs have. It's called depression. And I talk about it openly because it's not a fatal flaw. It's not I was not born as, it's not a felon or a criminal. It's a disease, and I get it every 5 to 10 years. And 3 things, not just because I like 3 in this one, cause depression. It's biochemical. My mom had it, her father had it. It's psychological. Fortunately, I don't have psychological issues that cause it, but it's the third one that most people have. It's situational. And the last time I had it was 5 years ago. I lost my mom. I had my first failure, Campus MD. I was being audited. So I had all 3 of these things happening. And when I look at personal, family, and business, and when all 3 are being affected significantly, it causes depression. Depression is just a warped sense of reality. And I know it, and a lot of really smart people like Abraham Lincoln and Bill Clinton, not just presidents, and especially entrepreneurs, were over-indexed, and so are Jews. So that's kind of my kryptonite that I have to manage. But I talk about it openly because, again, it's not a character flaw. So, and a lot of it because I take care of a lot of people in my family. Since my mom had a stroke after her breast cancer, I was a patriarch of the family at an early age. So I had a lot of responsibility. My sister was a single parent, and I'm philanthropic. So managing and taking too much on can trigger it. So again, I've learned a lot as a result of going through tough times. You know, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and there's a lot of truth to that. The successes that I've had, they were great, but I definitely learned more in the difficult times.
Thank you. So I sound a little bit like Oprah, but I will still ask the question. So it's a matter of priorities. Like, you know, you say I'm trying to keep up with my family and everything. So how do you, with your tight schedule, how do you keep, and I wish to think that you are a great father, a great husband. So how do you prioritize your
Yeah.
schedule?
Well, I have to work at that every day, and I showed one of my close friends' parents are here, and we were talking about that at lunch today. And one, I have to work at it. Two, one of my strengths, I'm very good at time management. I talked about, you know, the and, not the or. I lack in certain areas. My spatial relations suck. My sense of direction, thank you, Waze, sucks, but I can manage it. My ability to make good decisions, my ability to find talented people, my ability to prioritize, those are my strengths. And one of the things that I do is every year I list my goals and I go 5 years out. So 5 years ago, 2015, I listed, and then where am I in 2020? This was 5 years ago, so we're 2 months away. And I'll read to you a couple things. Positively disrupt Jewish education around the world. I had 600 students when I wrote this, over 7,000 5 years later. Second, establish a successful company, doing good and doing well. I didn't tell you about the company that I'm over here for. It's DoD, it's in the defense industry and technology. And we're gonna save American warfighters, and we're gonna save Jewish warfighters as well with the technology. So I'm really proud of that. That's doing good and doing well. And then the last one is raise 3 fantastic children that have passion and life balance. My kids are terrific in a lot of ways, but they're spoiled. Some of it's the digital phone, they're self-absorbed. Some of it are parents are helicopter parents and bulldozer parents, but I have to work really hard at it. And yeah, I wear multiple hats. I was a great son, taking care of my mom for 19 years. During the last 10 years, I was a good dad, but my mom needed me more than the kids. My wife could say, look, you've got to take care of your mom, and you do your best, not or. So at different times, our hats become more prominent and more important. And I'm always learning. And a great book is called Mindset. And you don't have to read it because I'll tell you in 60 seconds. It talks about growth mindset and fixed mindset. Growth mindset, you're into personal improvement. You take feedback and you take, whether it's constructive criticism, you want to get better, and you're open to it. Fixed mindset, you're myopic. You don't really listen. You take it personally. My daughter, who's a dancer, is very open-minded. My son, who's a great lacrosse player in college, and my wife were more fixed mindset. They're more similar. And my wife read the book after me. She said, Robert and I need to be more like you and Carly, being more open mindset, because you're going to learn more when you're more receptive to listening.
Yeah, so following when you're receptive, so you were talking about this, you know, you had a mentor, this billionaire, and I guess ever since you've been a mentor from millions of, maybe not millions,
No.
thousands of people.
No, I've
At least the
influenced.
7,000 from Shalom.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but I would like to hear more about, like, what kind of did you ever use any kind of mentors on the way beside this billionaire guy, like mentors for, you know, how to stand in front of the audience, how to speak out, what kind of mentors do you recommend? Which one did you use?
Yeah, so I actually have a presentation I did on building boards. And I talk a lot about, I've been on multiple boards as a member, and I've run boards for my company. From 21, I had a board. I was in college, and I talked about building a team. Does anybody remember the 3 important things in partnerships? I'll be impressed. What was number 1? Core values. Nicely done. What was number 2?
Number 3 is alignment.
Alignment's 3. You remember that complementary skill set. So with boards, I try to do the same thing. I want somebody that has the same core values. I want somebody that has skill sets that I'm not good at. And I would also add, they don't need to be aligned as much, but you want them to like you, because that's really important. Most board members in startups, they're not doing it for the money. That's for sure. So you want to find somebody that likes you, and obviously you like them, and they have a skill set that you need. So my first company in the college market, I had the vice provost of Duke University. I had my mentor who taught me direct marketing. I had a financial engineer. I'm part of YPO. Some of you may know EO, and then it's an international president organization. So I like to be part of organizations and network. I met a financial engineer who taught me how to buy companies and sell companies, and I learned a lot from him. So I surround myself with people that are really good in areas that the business needs, and I want to get better. And I want to understand it. I can leverage them. The benevolent billionaire, the reason why he was one of my mentors, because he was a great dad and he was very philanthropic. And that's what he represented for me. I didn't need to learn business from him, but I wanted to learn about how to be a great philanthropist and how to be a great dad. And he taught me that.
Okay, great. So one of the things we can take from you is that you do not need to be an expert in everything. You need to know what you're weaker at and just seek for the right professionals to help you.
Right. Double down what you're great at, manage the other areas, and you don't need 100 mentors, because if you have 3 or 5, A people attract A people. C's attract C's. If you can find someone that is an A in a certain area, they attract other A's that you will then be able to benefit from them as well. How you do the little things is how you do the big things. And I would encourage you to do the little things, not just in your business. For example, writing a handwritten note. That's a lost art. When we meet with someone, and my handwriting's terrible, but I write the next day. And sometimes I'll show you something on the end, but you want to do the little things, not to be different just to be different, to be thoughtful, to be a mensch, to follow up. Most people don't do the little things, and I say that thank God, because if everybody did what I did, I'd be average. And if you're average, you're as close to the bottom as you are to the top. So when you get frustrated with somebody because they don't do something that makes good sense, just say, at least I have the advantage because I do it and they don't.
Now, I have a question, which is, usually I tell people, do not regret things you've done. I mean, you've done it, you decided to do it, but I want to ask you, if there is one thing that you regret about during your professional career and personal life, what would it be?
Yeah, so Warren Buffett was asked, what's the biggest mistake you made in business? And this is a great point, especially for you CFOs out there. He said, I invested in a number of companies that in retrospect I probably shouldn't have, but the bigger mistakes are the ones that I missed, that I had good information on. Remember, if you have a competitive advantage, that's when you take advantage. In blackjack, when you can double down, you have an advantage. That's why you double down. That's the beauty. And in business, it's not like cards. It's not like every hands you start over. You build upon. When things are going well, put the gas on it. If things are not going well, step off. You got to pick your slots. Warren Buffett says the biggest mistake that I made, not errors in commission, but errors in omission. It's the ones that he didn't invest in, and they don't show up on the balance sheet. So people don't recognize that a big mistake was there. You may have heard of a little company called Groupon. The founders are good friends of mine. Matter of fact, one of them worked for me because I was in high school, I can say it, but he really worked with me. And they asked me to invest when it was called The Point. And I invested the year before in 2005. And by the way, if you raise money or if you're investing, again, it's timing. A lot of people don't take it personally if people don't invest what you're doing, because a lot of times it's independent of you. They just had a big cash need that they didn't expect. That's why your best friend didn't invest with you. And then sometimes when somebody invests that you never expected, they probably had a windfall or they had a great day. You've got to be thick-skinned, especially as an entrepreneur. You get no said a lot. Don't take it personally. Figure out a way to get to a yes out of it. So the biggest regret financially, not only did I miss Groupon once in the seed round, but one of my businesses did payment processing. And they came to us, they said, will you do our payment processing? And my CEO at the time, we had just signed up American Express. He said, Devin, we can't work with Eric and Brad because they're a startup, Groupon. Well, P.S., American Express 6 months later, they were shitty, we were not aligned. We actually dropped them. And you know the story of Groupon. So that's a financial miss. I've had a few of them, and that's okay, but I've gotten lucky the other way, not to the same level that I missed, but overall. And then personally, you know, Jim Collins, when I said I spent a day with him, December 4th, 1999, it's almost 20 years to the day, right before Good to Great came out. I'm sorry?
Right before the dot-com crash.
Right, and he talked about, a lot of people said built to flip, as opposed to built to last, which was his first book. So this gets to the personal question. And again, I remember stories and anecdotes. This is 20 years ago. Somebody asked the question, can you build a great business and a great life? It's an and again. So Collins says, well, let's first baseline where you are. He said, take two scenarios. If you have more money than you know what to do with, and everybody has a different number, whether it's $1 million, 100 million, he said that's the first one. And if you found out you had a terminal disease and you only had 6 months to live, take those two scenarios together and how differently would you live your life? If you would change it significantly, you probably have more regrets.
Of course.
If you wouldn't change much, you probably don't have that many personal regrets. It's not a lot that I would change personally. Probably my mom not having a massive stroke at 55 in the middle of her career, because she was helping thousands of women and families. That's 55's a really young age to, in essence, lose her ability to be a professional and be at the same level prior to the stroke. But I've been blessed, and I think about that a lot. It's hard every day, but I think about it a lot. When I'm successful and when I'm not. Look, my wife had melanoma. A week before I was closing on a big deal, I was going to have a life-changing event. It was the student loan business. And we didn't know whether it was stage 4 or stage 1. And I'd give it all back. I wanted it. I didn't care about the close. And thank God it was stage 1, and she's fine, and she was pregnant, 4 months pregnant. And why do I get lucky? Why do we get lucky and it's stage 1 versus people that stage 4 and don't get lucky? And there's a great book by Kushner, Rabbi Kushner. And a lot of people think the title is Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. That's not the title. It's When Bad Things Happen to Good People. So it's a long-winded way of saying not a whole lot of personal regrets. I feel good looking in the mirror that I've been a good son, a good brother, a good father, a good philanthropist, a good Jew. Even when I have depression, I lack joy, but I still feel good, as weird as that may sound.
Thanks, Devin, for sharing these personal things with us. I want to ask a question now. We all know about the WeWork thing now, and we know there is a very common problem with startups and ego and pride startups, which causes many problems. Some of them just shut down because. So how do you, with your experience from the startups you've seen, you've encountered, how do you deal with this pride thing of like founders that insist of staying the CEOs and things like? How do you deal with this?
So one of my favorite articles is by Noah Wasserman out of Harvard. It's called Rich versus King. And with my wife, I say I'd rather be happy versus right. With my business partner, I say I'd rather be rich versus right. And in business, I'd rather be rich versus king. I don't need to be king. I enjoy building teams. And CEOs, you have to understand the psyche of the CEO. You have to understand why they started the business and what they want. There are some that are megalomaniacs, and they become incredibly successful, and they keep the majority of the business. Then there are some that want everyone to be involved, and they go out of business. It's that balance of being who you are as the founder and having very few, it's the exception if you're just in it for the money. The most successful CEOs, executive teams, they find a problem that they want to solve for. And it's just so hard to start a business just for the money, cross that chasm, and become an ongoing concern. It's really hard. And I will tell you, I recommend if you don't have the stomach, the ability to manage risk, and you're not an optimist, but you want to be entrepreneurial, be an intrapreneur. Take a larger company and do something creative within that. Or take a platform, and you're not going to have the same. I love platforms because you don't start from scratch and you have multiple bites of the apple. So people, a big term that I like is optionality. Everybody has options, even when you think you don't. They may not be good options, but optionality and proactive patience. When you're an entrepreneur, you've got to be patient, but you also need speed and you need focus. And you got to know when to be patient. You got to know when speed is critical, and you also have to know when focus almost exclusively. And that's hard, but that's what I recommend in CEOs and entrepreneurs, and build great teams. Again, if you want to be king, go try to do it on your own. It's hard.
Devin, last questions before we get a question from the audience. Just about, you've been a philanthropist for a long time. Can you just describe us what philanthropic, activity contributes to you as entrepreneur?
Sure. So I'm into understanding personal profiles, individuals. You probably know about Myers-Briggs and the DISC if you want to evaluate talent. The one I like the best is Enneagram. And it's 1 through 9 attributes. 1's a reformer, 2's a helper, 3's an achiever. Look at Enneagram. Not only does it give you good insight, but it explains the relationship to other individuals. When things are going well, it shows you why, and when things aren't going well, it makes recommendations. Well, I'm a helper. My two, that I'm a helper first and I'm an achiever second. So I know that I enjoy helping. And that's part of the reason why doing good and doing well, it's an and again. I like to do good and do well. And in business, my first company, the university was my partner. We would revenue share with them. So I didn't talk much about my first company, except I just started with carpet. But the last year I sold it, when I was 31, we did 35 million in revenue, and we gave 15% back to the schools. So that last year, we gave them almost $5 million that they used. It was 1,000 schools, so they averaged whatever that is, 50,000 approximately, if that's right, or 500. Somebody do the math for me. But every single school benefited because we'd revenue share, and they did good things with it. So I've always enjoyed doing good and doing well, and I also feel fortunate. I was born by my parents at this time in life. They gave me opportunities, and I believe in giving back. And one thing that Judaism and getting my, I talked about getting that spark ignited with Shalom Learning. I used to give 80% to colleges and hospitals, and 20% to Judaism. And somebody said to me once, Jewish causes, Gentiles don't necessarily give, and we're such a small number. Jews give to Jewish causes, so I flipped my philanthropy, and now I think I'm 90% Jewish causes. Even though my school and my kids' schools and some of these other things are important, Jewish causes need it more because we're really the only ones. And I'm generalizing, but I think you understand the point.
Yeah, giving is receiving.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Devin. We're gonna. Thank you. Thank you. Guys, we have time for a few questions.
We'll finish up before 8:30.
Yeah.
We like, by the way, I said, one of my favorite anecdotes, and I got a lot of them, to be,
Yes, please.
Mentioned that you had invested in a number of startups. I'm curious if any of them were female funded.
you know, I have always had a female partner because I love the perspective, and my mom had a strong mother, and I value talent, and I try not to focus on gender or nationality or creed, but I like talent, and part of talent is diversity and balance. So I have always had a woman because they have a skill set that I've been attracted to. With that being said, and I've invested in over 40 startups, I'm embarrassed to tell you offhand, and I've had partners, but CEOs, I can't think of one. It's not for lack of trying. I've mentored a lot of female CEOs for free. I can tell you that, a lot. But one of the problems in YPO, you have to have a certain threshold. You have to have 12 million in revenue. You have to have 100 employees, and you have to get in before you're 44 years old, and they kick you out at 49. Because women, a lot of them have children, their best years to ascend professionally, they are doing a more important job of raising family. So we try to get women CEOs, but it's hard because of some of those issues. So it is something I try to focus on the best opportunity, but not as good a job as I would like to. I'm sorry?
Change YPO. Why start at
49, well, their best practices, and it's 60 years. They've run successful organizations. And there's a nice YPO chapter, NEO organization in Israel.
More questions, guys? Yeah, please.
What do you think about timing in the education space for the tech startups?
So education is tough because it's so bureaucratic, and I'm generalizing. I have an expression, it takes 7 to say yes and 1 to say no. That's really hard to get through. And in all deference, and you guys can correct me here, there's a misnomer in the United States where everybody thinks, we're great at education. We're great entrepreneurs because we're a young country, not as young as you. And we have immigrants that come over, and we teach risk. But our blocking and tackling and some of the standardization, we're low in around other countries. Israel, because as smart as Israelis are, and all the Nobel Peace Prize and all the public companies coming out of this small little country, the education's not as good because the resources go to something more important, and that's safety and security. And the technology's not as good. It is in Herzliya and tech area, but technology throughout the country and 5G and some of the others, we don't have as much money here as we would like. So it's a hard business to make money because it's bureaucratic and it's not that big in the grand scheme of things. Now, if you want to make a difference, there's nothing more important than education. But it's hard from a return on investment. It's hard from a return on impact. The only one that may be better is medicine. I mean, doctors and educators, that's the most noble cause.
People invest heavily in medicine. Like it's a strong investment. In education, you don't get anywhere near that type of capital.
Well, look at the GDP of what healthcare, because it's so inefficient, it's so much bigger. And even though education's controlled by municipalities, states, it's much more difficult. And here's the big difference. Education doesn't like for-profit entrepreneurs. They think, separation of church and state medicine, they'll accept entrepreneurs more. So for those reasons, it's more difficult.
Yeah, last question.
Talking about education, my son went to Hebrew school, hated it. What is your goal? What are you trying to teach them?
Yeah.
Hebrew or praying?
It's a good one to end on, because I think it's the intersection of my love of education and my passion for Judaism and Israel. So I talk about Shalom learning. We take 19th century teaching as a mode which is difficult with 20th century teachers and 21st century students. The disconnect or the gap between an antiquated style of teaching with most of us in here are 20th century teachers, and now you have 21st century students. We've got to close that gap. That's education around the world. My passion and my goal for Shalom learning, if we can make, there's something called what's the word? Joanne, help me out here. If you're not engaged, if there's Reform, there's Conservative, and there's Orthodox, and then you have no affiliation. Unaffiliated, thanks. I have problems with the 4-syllable words late at night. Unaffiliated is what I was looking for. If you're unaffiliated and Shalom learning makes you a little more affiliated, that's a win. If you're Reform and it makes you a little more engaged, that's a win. Irrespective of where you are on the spectrum, if Shalom learning can get the student and the parent more engaged, and we're going to be at 10,000 students next year, and over the many years, that to me is awesome, because there are going to be some kids that I would have done nothing for Judaism at the level if it wasn't for Shalom learning, which ignited my fire. So making everybody more affiliated and more engaged, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, to me, that's a big win.
Any more questions? Just a second. It's okay. Yuri, a little small one, okay?
I'll give a small answer.
Okay, and give a tiny answer, okay?
Small answer.
What about what you're looking in the team of a startup? And I was interested, how do you go about recruiting or finding the best partner? How do you interview? What are you looking for?
So a couple quick expressions. If you don't have an assistant, you are an assistant. If you don't know what your hourly rate is, you should. It's not that hard. 2,000 hours, if you make $50,000, 50 weeks, you make $50 an hour, $10. You can figure it out. If you're able, so I use executive recruiters for a couple reasons. My time is more valuable doing other things. They are much better. They understand my culture. They understand my core values. They understand what I look for. And that's what they do. They pull people out in what I need. People that are in transit, by happenstance, I play the odds. If you're great at hiring, you're right 50% of the time. That's if you're great. Most people, they're too slow to fire and they're too quick to hire. I'm the opposite. I let people go and I give them soft landing when they don't fit and I help them. But I take my time in finding talent. It is so hard. But if you run a process, you increase your probability of success. Process and systems. For sales, process and systems. We have a sales playbook. One of my partners who's speaking tomorrow at a couple places. We have a process for hiring. We're consistent. My last line. Routine will set you free. Good night.
Thanks to Devin. That was a huge question, and you really dealt with it well. Devin, thanks a lot for being here with us. Thank you guys for coming.
8:29.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah,